No one ever warns you how love can seep into the cracks of your mind and quietly drown the parts of you you thought were safe. I was 28, exhausted from months of feeling invisible, as if I'd been folded into the background of my own life. Grief had hollowed me out, leaving only the shell of who I once was, wandering through days that blurred into each other like shadows in a dimly lit corridor. I'd become a ghost, drifting through routines, craving connection but terrified of being seen too deeply. That afternoon, I found myself in the small-town art gallery, where the scent of aged paper and dried paint lingered like a forgotten memory. The walls were lined with paintings that felt more like whispers, each brushstroke a secret I wasn't meant to understand. The air was thick with the quiet hum of distant conversations, punctuated by the faint scrape of a brush on canvas. Outside, the sky had turned a dull gray, rain tapping softly against the glass like a hesitant heartbeat. He appeared at the door just as I reached for a black and white photograph, the edges frayed as if it had been kept hidden for years. His presence was subtle but unsettling, like a moth circling a lamp overhead, drawn irresistibly towards something dangerous. His eyes caught mine through the glass, intense and unblinking, as if he was searching for a reason to stay. There was an odd familiarity in his gaze, as if he knew a secret I'd long buried. He spoke softly, voice smooth and warm but carrying an undercurrent of something darker. "You look like you're trying to find something you've lost," he said, and I felt the air shift, the dull hum of the gallery suddenly louder, more invasive. His words were rehearsed, too perfect, like a line from a play I'd seen before but couldn't quite remember. I wanted to dismiss it, but my eyes lingered on his face, and I noticed the way his hand hovered near my hair, as if he was about to touch it, too soon, too intimate. Without thinking, I stepped back slightly, but he kept his gaze fixed on me, unrelenting. "Fate has a strange way of guiding us," he added, voice almost a whisper now, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. The faint flickering light above us cast shadows across his face, making him appear more like a ghost than a man. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, the sound echoing like a warning I couldn't ignore. A poem slipped from a nearby shelf, falling between us, its pages fluttering down like dying leaves. I reached out instinctively, but he was already close enough to smell the faint scent of cedar and something metallic, like blood. My heart quickened, pounding a frantic rhythm I couldn't control. The world around us seemed to tilt, the colors bleeding into each other as if reality was unraveling. I remember thinking, back then, how it felt like a beginning, an unexpected moment of connection amid my loneliness. But now, every little detail feels like a warning. I didn't know it then, but I was already being watched, my vulnerability a quiet invitation. And as I looked into his eyes that day, I wondered, was I the one he was truly after, or was I just another shadow in his collection? Maybe, just maybe, that encounter marked the first step towards something I'd never fully understand. He remembered the smallest things I said, like how I loved the scent of rain or the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous. Later, he'd bring it up casually, as if it had been etched into his memory all along. It made me feel seen, deeply understood, as if our connection was woven from threads no one else could touch. Sometimes, he'd share a story about himself, something raw and vulnerable, so I'd feel we were matching each other's secrets, forging an unbreakable bond. He'd describe a childhood moment, a pain he'd hid away, and I'd find myself leaning in, eager to offer my own shadows, unaware of how easily I was slipping into his narrative. He praised my perspective as if I were rare. "No one sees the world like you do," he'd whisper, voice low and possessive, like a secret only he held. It felt like an honor, a privilege, until I started to notice the way he looked at me when he said it, a flicker of something darker lurking beneath his words. His admiration seemed to wrap around me like a shield, making me feel indispensable, chosen by fate to be his. One evening, he handed me a small gift, a delicate flower, matched perfectly to the tattoo on my wrist. His hands trembled slightly as he placed it in my palm, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The gesture seemed innocent, yet the way he'd chosen that particular bloom, so meticulously, made me wonder if he saw parts of me I hadn't even acknowledged myself. Without words, he mirrored my gestures, touching his own wrist where I had a scar, brushing his fingers along his collarbone when I'd mentioned feeling exposed. It made me feel close, as if he was quietly taking pieces of my life into himself, making us inseparable. We sat in silence more often than not now, just breathing together, the air thick with unspoken promises. I found myself answering him faster, canceling plans to meet him, eager to keep his approval. A part of me felt a strange pull, like I was rewiring my own needs to match his. I'd catch myself obsessively checking my phone, wondering if I'd disappointed him with a delayed reply or a missed message. The line between fear and devotion blurred, and I told myself it was love, that this was what it meant to truly connect. But beneath the surface, a quiet alarm sounded. There was an unsettling weight to his gaze, as if he was measuring me, cataloging my responses. I felt exposed, yet strangely safe, like I was someone fragile in a glass case, and he was the only one who knew how to handle me. I told myself this was devotion, that loving someone meant surrendering a little control. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly losing myself, that the boundaries I'd once guarded were dissolving, replaced by his quiet insistence that I needed him more than I realized. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was the only one who truly understood his chaos. But I started wondering, at what cost? Was I merely a puzzle piece, fitting perfectly because I was afraid to be left alone? If obsession felt like protection, then maybe I'd been safe all along, or maybe I'd been deceived into believing I was. The more I tried to hold on to what I thought was love, the more I sensed that something darker was lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to reveal itself. And as I sat there, feeling the weight of his gaze, I couldn't help but wonder, how long before I realized I'd been slowly disappearing into him. My days felt like shadows slipping through my fingers, slight, elusive, impossible to hold on to. Every moment I thought I understood, something would shift, and I'd realize I'd been walking in a fog I couldn't quite shake. It was as if the world around me had become a thin veneer, fragile and cracking at the edges, and I was afraid to look too closely, lest I see what was truly hidden beneath. He started showing up when I least expected it. I was in the neighborhood, he'd say softly, as if that explained everything. Sometimes, I'd find him standing at my door, as if he belonged there, in the quiet space I once claimed as my own. His visits became routine, a gentle invasion cloaked as concern, as if love meant always being nearby, always knowing where I was. I caught myself checking my phone more often, his voice notes and texts peppering my day, asking endless questions: where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. His words wove into my routine, making it feel like my life was no longer mine but a series of shared moments he carefully curated. He suggested I spend less time with my friends or family, claiming they stressed me out, that they distracted me from what truly mattered. "You deserve peace," he'd whisper, as if peace was something he could give or take away. Slowly, my schedule shifted, meals aligned with his preferences, my sleeping hours adjusted to his comfort. I felt my days narrowing, the edges blurring like watercolor bleeding into itself. My world was shrinking, quieter, as if someone had turned down the volume, muffling my voice until I wondered if I'd ever been loud enough to be heard. The strangest part was that I began doubting myself. He'd look at me with those calm, unwavering eyes and say, "I never said that, babe. You're misremembering again." Or, "You always do this when you're overwhelmed. Imagine problems where there are none." His words cloaked reality in a gentle fog, making me question what I knew to be true. Memories flickered like broken film. Some things I was sure I remembered, others faded into confusion. I'd find myself caught between fragments, trying to piece together what was real and what was just my mind playing tricks. It was like my mind was a crumpled photograph, edges torn, colors faded, impossible to restore. I felt like wallpaper peeling in a room no one cared about, the image beneath hidden, forgotten. My thoughts became muted, my instincts dulled. I'd cancel plans without explaining, laugh when I wanted to cry, rehearse responses to keep the peace. I hid parts of myself, shrinking into the shadows of my own life out of fear of upsetting him. The more I tried to hold on to who I was, the more I felt myself slipping away, like a faint echo of someone I used to recognize. Sometimes I told myself he was just afraid of losing me, that his actions stemmed from love. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Why did I feel so hollow inside, so disconnected from the person I used to be? I kept asking myself, maybe this was love, but why did I feel so alone within it? Each time I stayed silent, I wondered if I was choosing peace or surrender. Because the more I tried to hold on to myself, the more I wondered if I was just losing the fight altogether. I started deleting the apps I used to love, quietly removing fragments of myself from my phone, as if that could somehow undo the ache of losing what I once knew. He never told me to do it, but I convinced myself it was for the best, an act of love, I told myself. Yet, every tap on the screen felt heavier than the last, as if I was erasing parts of my own identity with each swipe. I told myself it was harmless, just a way to keep us both safe, but deep down, I knew I was giving up more than I wanted to admit. Then came the little things, skipping my birthday dinner because he didn't feel like going. I felt that familiar tug of guilt, like I was abandoning myself for him, but I convinced myself it was just a small sacrifice. I thought, maybe, this is what love looks like, letting go, quietly, without protest. I even hid a favorite photo in a drawer, its edges worn from years of meaning, now tucked away behind layers of fabric and shadows. It was as if I was trying to pretend that part of me had never existed, that I could erase my past to make room for the version he wanted. I stopped wearing my favorite earrings, the ones that made me feel alive. I kept them in a box, hidden from sight, as if that could hide my fading sense of self. When I caught myself glancing at the mirror, I'd avert my eyes quickly, avoiding the reflection I no longer recognized. Who was I becoming? Or had I always been this quiet, this small? Every time I closed a door for him, I felt a part of myself slip away, like sand falling through my fingers, small, silent, irretrievable. He never raised his voice, never demanded outright, but his words carried weight. He'd say I used to be more loving, or that I'd started to change, that I didn't care enough anymore. His praise when I silenced my own voice was like a balm, a reminder that obedience might somehow feel like affection. I found myself smiling for him, forcing a brightness I didn't feel, wondering if he could see the cracks forming beneath my eyes. I wondered if he noticed that I was shrinking, that I was becoming an echo of someone he approved of, rather than myself. Sometimes I thought I was making choices, but in truth, I was just drifting further away. The small acts of surrender weren't big, but they weighed heavily on my chest, an invisible chain tightening around my heart. I wasn't losing myself all at once, it was a slow, almost imperceptible erosion. Every quiet decision felt like a soft collapse, a gentle surrender to the person I was becoming, more compliant, less real. And as I sat alone in the quiet, I realized I was starting to forget what it felt like to stand firm. My mind was clouded, filled with his words and silences. I didn't know if I was still me, or just the version he needed me to be. The reflection in the mirror was a stranger, and I wondered how long I could hold on to the fragments of who I used to be before they disappeared completely. Because sometimes, I feel myself slipping, just a little more each day, into a shadow I can't quite see. I woke up and the room felt unfamiliar, like I had slipped into a dream I couldn't wake from. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with a rhythm I couldn't follow. My reflection was gone from the mirror, perhaps it had never been there at all. I reached out, but my hand met only darkness, as if I had become a ghost drifting through my own life. I tried to remember what day it was, but the memories refused to form. Every thought felt distant, like a fragment of someone else's story, not mine. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of myself in fleeting windows or reflections I avoided. The face staring back seemed foreign, a stranger I was trying to recognize but couldn't quite reach. My voice, once steady and clear, now sounded clipped and hollow, as if someone else was speaking through me. I'd catch myself murmuring words I didn't choose, repeating phrases that didn't belong to me. It was as if I'd been rewired, my mind falling into a pattern he dictated, my thoughts no longer mine but an echo of his voice. He was there, always there, shaping my inner world with subtle, relentless precision. I found my journal replaced, its pages blank, waiting for his new narrative. The playlist I loved was gone, replaced by a melody he crafted, one that burrowed into my bones and made my heart ache differently. He changed the wallpaper on my phone, images of us, smiles I didn't remember sharing, faces I didn't recognize. Each alteration was a stitch in the fabric of myself, slowly tearing apart the original pattern. He told me I was being dramatic when I questioned the shifting textures of my reality. That never happened, he said softly, as if erasing my memories was just a matter of perspective. I knew better, but my mind felt like it was slipping through cracks, fragments falling away before I could hold them. Sometimes I'd try to cling to a memory, a moment of independence, a fragment of who I used to be, but it dissolved into shadows, like a fleeting whisper I couldn't grasp. My internal voice was splitting, one side desperately trying to remember who I was, the other succumbing to his rewriting. I felt caught in a silent war, my true self fading into the background, overshadowed by a voice that told me I was never enough, that I was better off under his control. Even my love for him was a flickering candle, threatened to be snuffed out by the weight of his manipulation. I was repeating his truths, not my own, and each repetition felt like a betrayal of who I once was. Sometimes I'd catch myself speaking, and I'd wonder whose words they were, mine or his. It felt like I was being rewritten in his handwriting, each letter more unfamiliar than the last. My sense of reality was dissolving, slipping into a haze that blurred the edges of what I thought I knew. I'd wake up with no memory of how I'd got there, feeling like I was drifting in a fog that refused to lift. The girl I used to be was slipping away, her face fading into a vague outline I could no longer grasp. Maybe I hadn't vanished yet, but I could no longer remember the girl I used to be. My voice sounded foreign, even in my own mind. If I was still in there somewhere, I couldn't find her anymore. The pieces of myself were dissolving, leaving behind only echoes of a person I no longer recognized, as if I was already lost to the shadows I had helped create. My reflection moved out of sync with my own breath, as if my face was no longer mine. I stared into the mirror, but the image staring back at me seemed distorted, shifting just out of reach. My eyes, once sharp and familiar, felt heavy and hollow, like they belonged to someone else, someone I couldn't recognize. I reached out, but my hand trembled as if it didn't belong to me. The glass rippled beneath my fingertips, and for a moment, I wondered if I was losing my grasp on reality entirely. The room around me felt wrong, furniture slightly rearranged, colors muted, shadows lingering longer than they should. I noticed a photo frame on the wall, its glass cracked, the picture inside faded to a ghostly blur. I reached for it, but the image had vanished. I blinked, trying to recall when I'd last seen it intact. Had I taken it down? Did I ever put it up? The questions spiraled, but no answers came. Time had become a meaningless measurement. I'd lost track of how long I'd been confined within these walls, as if my existence had been condensed into a single, unending moment of confusion. I heard his voice, soft, familiar, but layered over my own thoughts, echoing louder than my internal monologue. Even in silence, I could feel his words pressing against my mind, whispering commands I couldn't resist. I'd catch myself repeating phrases I didn't remember learning, as if his voice had seeped into my subconscious and taken root there. I started questioning if my memories were truly mine, or if they'd been replaced, edited, rewritten by his influence. I remembered moments, but they felt hollow, like stories I'd heard in someone else's voice. Even my dreams now seemed to follow rules he dictated, scenes shifting to fit his narrative, not mine. Subtle signs of his manipulation cluttered my environment. Clothes I'd never chosen hung in my closet, strangers' fabrics and unfamiliar patterns. Playlists I never curated played softly in the background, melodies that didn't belong to my memories but felt eerily familiar, as if they were embedded in my mind's fabric. Small objects I'd kept, tokens of my past, disappeared overnight, photos, jewelry, notes, replaced with things I couldn't recognize. I'd find myself touching them, trying to grasp what was real, but the edges of my world kept slipping away. Inside my mind, his voice persisted, inside me, shaping my thoughts, whispering commands I couldn't silence. I'd remember things that didn't belong to me, memories that felt like figments planted deliberately. I'd see flashes of scenes I didn't recognize, moments that didn't fit my history, but they felt so vivid, so convincing, I questioned whether I'd ever known myself at all. Were these memories truly mine? Or was he weaving a new story inside my head? Yet, amid the chaos, I found a fragile flicker of resistance. A small, forgotten photo tucked behind a drawer, an image of me smiling with a clarity I thought I'd lost, glimmered in the dim light. A single note scrawled in my handwriting, faint but defiant, caught my eye. It read, "This isn't over." My childhood memories surfaced unexpectedly, strange and out of place, reminding me of who I used to be. For the briefest moment, I felt a whisper beneath the silence, a faint pulse of my own voice trying to break through the noise. Maybe I was still in there somewhere. Maybe, buried beneath the manipulation and the erasure, a part of me remained intact. But I knew I'd need to remember before I forgot again. Before the echo of his voice swallowed me whole. I clung to that tiny spark of defiance, praying it was enough to keep me alive, inside, somewhere, still myself. My mind felt like it was shattering from the inside out, as if 1,000 fragile glass pieces were colliding and exploding in a dark, infinite space. I was staring at the mirror, but my reflection was gone, no face, no eyes, just an empty, distorted void. I reached out, trembling, and my hand passed through the glass-like surface, as if I was trying to touch someone who no longer existed. The room around me blurred, dissolving into shadows, and I wondered if I had already disappeared, if I was just a ghost trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Then I saw it, a photo on my phone, one I was sure I had deleted months ago. But there it was, glaring back at me. A picture of my face, smiling, innocent, unknowing. Only it wasn't my face. It was his. His eyes, his smirk, staring at me like a cruel, mocking mirror. My stomach twisted as I stared at the image, unable to breathe, feeling the walls of my mind tighten around me. How long had he been rewriting my reality? When had I become a ghost in my own life? A voice, my voice, whispered from somewhere deep inside, trembling and fractured. I didn't recognize it. Who am I anymore? I begged silently, voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. The words felt distant, like echoes from a past I was desperately trying to forget. I thought I was losing my mind, but maybe I had already lost it, long ago, in a slow, quiet descent I never saw coming. Then I heard a voice, an old voicemail from a friend, from someone I thought I'd erased. But it played clearly in my head, words I hadn't heard in so long. "Are you okay? Please, call me. I'm worried about you." The message was from a time I barely remembered, before the fog took over. Had he played it for me? Had he planted it in my mind, or was it always there, waiting to surface? I clutched my head, screaming silently, feeling the edges of my sanity fraying apart. Everything was wrong, my past, my present, my very sense of self. The boundaries I had once held so tightly dissolved into nothingness. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The reflection that stared back was a stranger I had helped create. I felt my identity slip away, melting into the shadows, leaving only a hollow shell behind. I was no longer sure if I was living or just existing in a trap I had been locked inside for so long. A single thought hammered through the chaos. What if I was already gone? Not just losing myself, but gone entirely? This wasn't fear anymore, it was surrender, a resignation so complete I could taste it. I was hanging by a thread, teetering on the edge of something unthinkable. I wanted to run, to hide, to scream for help, but the words caught in my throat. I was rooted there, trembling, on the brink of something I couldn't name. I stood there in the suffocating silence, fists clenched, whispering my own name, trying to remember if it still belonged to me. But my voice was hollow, distant, hollowed out by the shadows that had crept into my mind. And then, suddenly, something inside me cracked, like a mirror shattering into 1,000 pieces, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I didn't try to hold it together. I just stood there, trembling, knowing that the fragile illusion of who I was had finally begun to break apart. But I wasn't ready to fall completely, not yet. Not quite. I was making tea, the routine so familiar I almost forgot how fragile that feeling was. The steam curled up softly, filling the quiet kitchen with its gentle hiss. I reached for the mug, but then I saw it. Something was wrong. A message blinking on my phone, out of place, out of time. My heart stuttered as I read the words, "Are you okay?" It was from someone I thought had abandoned me, someone I'd convinced myself was irrelevant. But the moment hit me like a cold wave. I had never sent that message. I never even opened that app. My fingers trembled, and yet, I felt the cold certainty. I hadn't been in control of my own life for a long time. In the corner of my eye, a photo flickered onto the screen. I froze. It was me, standing in a place I didn't recognize, with a look in my eyes I'd never wear. But I was there, captured, frozen in a moment I'd never chosen. My reflection was broken, distorted. The face stared back, familiar, yet alien. I stared harder, feeling the walls of my mind slipping, as if the memories I trusted had been erased or rewritten. My mind spun, trying to grasp the truth behind that image, but all I could feel was a deep, gnawing dread. I looked around, searching for the familiar, but everything was wrong. The room's angles were skewed, shadows stretched in unnatural ways. My hands moved on their own, brushing my hair with a rhythm that wasn't mine, automatic, mechanical, rehearsed. I remembered doing it, or thought I did. The photo frame on the shelf was turned slightly, but I hadn't touched it. It stared back at me, a silent mockery, as if it had been waiting for me to notice how it had been watching me all along. Then I saw it, something I shouldn't have. A dress hung in my closet, one I never remembered buying. A pair of shoes I never chose. My own handwriting, altered on a note I'd never written, the ink smudged as if someone had erased parts of my mind. My pulse quickened. Something was wrong, profoundly wrong. The quiet horror seeped in, not a loud revelation, but a slow, steady erosion of everything I thought I knew. The love I believed I'd felt? It wasn't love at all. It was control, obsession, a carefully constructed lie. He hadn't fallen for me. He had built me, piece by piece, word by word. Every "I love you" was a lock clicking shut, sealing me inside a cage of his design. I realized, painfully, that I was never free. I was a story he had written, a narrative stitched into my skin, a ghost haunting my own life. The love I believed in was just a story, illusion he fabricated to keep me tethered, obedient. And now, standing in the quiet chaos of my own mind, I saw the truth. Something had been wrong for so long, it had become normal. I was living a lie, and I had no idea how to escape it. But one thing was clear, I couldn't trust myself anymore. The world around me was fractured, and I was already losing myself within it. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I had to act. Because if this was the truth, if I was nothing more than a story he wrote, then I had to find a way to rewrite my ending. I wasn't his. I never was. And that realization, trembling and raw, was the first step toward breaking free. I waited until I heard his breathing slow, then I reached for my phone, trembling so badly I thought I might drop it. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest, each beat echoing the chaos inside me. I had made the decision, this was the moment I had to try. No matter how fragile I felt, no matter how uncertain, I had to break free, even if just for a second. I slipped out of bed silently, every movement feeling wrong, like I was still under his spell, still waiting for him to wake up and catch me. My mind raced with doubts. What if he's already in my head, controlling my thoughts even now? What if this was all a trap, and I was just running into another cage? The silence in the room felt thick, oppressive, like a trap closing around me. I held my breath, fingers trembling as I unlocked the phone, my thumb hovering over the call button. Every nerve screamed to stay still, but I forced my hand forward. I almost made the call, but then I hesitated. What if he wakes up? What if he sees me? My fingers shook uncontrollably, as if they didn't belong to me anymore. I could feel the weight of his watchful presence, even in the darkness. Was that a shadow moving just beyond the door? Or was it my paranoia, spun from months of manipulation? Suddenly, I heard a soft creak. Was that him? My body froze, paralyzed by instinct I couldn't trust. I dared not turn around, but my mind conjured his face, his eyes, waiting for me to slip. I clenched my fists, trying to block out the panic, trying to focus on the tiny, desperate hope that this was my chance, my moment of rebellion. In that split second, I saw it, a thin, frayed edge of a photograph I'd hidden. Without thinking, I grabbed a nearby pair of scissors, my hands trembling as I snipped at the corner, tearing the picture from its frame. The glass shattered, a sharp crack echoing through the silent room. I didn't look back, I just kept ripping until the face was torn beyond recognition, a fragment of the life I once knew. I felt a rush of relief, fleeting as it was, but then a hollow dread crept in. I'd broken something, yes, but I hadn't escaped. I was still here, still trapped inside this nightmare. And then I saw it, his silhouette in the doorway, watching me. I caught my reflection in the broken mirror, and for a moment, I saw not myself but a ghost, a fractured version of who I used to be. My face was blurred, my voice gone, replaced by a hollow echo. I realized I'd been trying to erase myself, to destroy the parts he'd twisted, but I was still standing, still vulnerable. He would know, he had to. And when he did, I wouldn't be ready. I was exposed now, fragile and trembling, suspended on the edge of something terrible. I knew I hadn't escaped yet, not truly. But I had cracked the glass. Maybe I could still find a way to shatter the illusion completely, before it was too late. I didn't run. Not yet. I just stood there, trembling, my mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. The silence afterward was deafening, louder than any scream, louder than the chaos I had just escaped. My heart pounded in my ears as I stared at the broken fragments of the photo I had torn and the shattered glass beneath my trembling hands. For a moment, I wondered if any part of me still remained inside that wreckage. He was there, of course. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes before he spoke, calm but deadly. "You think you can escape me?" he whispered, voice cold as steel. It was then I realized how deep the manipulation ran, how much of myself I had already surrendered, how much of my true self I had erased to fit into his story. I felt the hollow space where my identity used to be, hollow but aching with a dull, persistent pain. I looked into his face and saw the reflection of someone I no longer recognized, someone I had become, a ghost haunting her own life. Memories flooded back, of the gallery, the faces I thought I knew, the girl I once was. But those memories felt distant, like echoes of someone else's life. I clung to the fragments of my voice, my thoughts, my name that I had tried to drown out for so long. "You took everything," I whispered, voice trembling, yet somehow stronger than I felt. "But I'm still here. I'm still me." My words sounded foreign, like a stranger's, but they were mine. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small locket I had hidden, a symbol of my own voice, my choices. I looked at him, tears blurring my vision, and said, "You can't erase what's left of me." He stepped closer, eyes dark and unyielding, but I no longer cared about fear. I had nothing left to lose. With a sudden surge of courage, I threw the locket into the flames I had started earlier, an act of rebellion, of reclaiming even a sliver of myself. The fire roared, consuming the symbol of my past and his control over it. I watched as the flames devoured what they could, and in that fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of liberation. Then, I turned away. Not because I believed I was free, but because I knew this was the beginning of something new, an ongoing fight to find my voice again, to remember who I was before he rewrote my story. As I walked away from the wreckage, I felt the weight of what I had lost and what I still carried inside me. The shadows of his presence lingered, but I refused to let them define me. Maybe I didn't survive him completely. Maybe parts of me will always be shadows, echoes of a girl who once believed in herself. But I survived enough. Enough to whisper my name aloud in the mirror, to feel the faint pulse of my own heartbeat, to know I am still here, scarred, battered, but unbroken. And as I disappeared into the night, I carried with me a quiet truth: even in the darkest moments, there's a flicker of light waiting to be reignited. I may walk away with nothing, but somehow, that was everything. I am still me. And that alone is my victory.